Hello, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to Some Stops Along the Way. I'm Mark McCord, your host. Some Stops Along the Way, of course, is a podcast that highlights some of the most interesting countries in the world through the lens of my work there, but also focuses on their history, their geopolitics, and their culture. We've been in a thematic area now for a few weeks called Times of Joy and Times of Sorrow. And today we're going to jump into a new country, and we're going to have three episodes on this particular country. It's a country of the United Kingdom, or sometimes colloquially called England. But I think that you'll enjoy these episodes very much as we're going to peel back a lot of layers of the onion about this country that you might not know, or maybe that you have heard about but haven't really delved into. We're going to do that over the next three episodes. But before we jump into this fascinating country, wanted to remind you that many of the people and stories that are included on this podcast, and some that aren't, are included in my memoir, Some Stops Along the Way, which is available on Amazon. And also, I've got a couple of novels out. They're not new ones. They've been out for a while, but that you might want to look at. One of them is called The Little Girls, which is a story about the 60-year friendship of three young girls who grew up in the old city of Jerusalem, one Christian, one Muslim, and one Jewish. It is a story I think that will resonate with a lot of you. And then, of course, The Ghost of Mariupol. I've discussed this book before. I started writing it while I was in Ukraine, and it is a story of resilience and courage that I think that you will like. So check those out on Amazon as well. But now we want to jump into this first episode on the United Kingdom. And as I was preparing this episode, I thought back to the time I was a child in rural Oklahoma, and I dreamed of visiting the United Kingdom, and specifically London, and seeing Queen Elizabeth. I remember sitting in my room and looking through the World Book Encyclopedia, and there was a picture of the Queen on her coronation day, and she looked so beautiful and so regal. And as a child, I looked at that photo and thought, if I could just meet her, if I could just get to that country and meet her, that it would be a capstone of my life. Well, of course, that's a childlike mind, and it would not have been the capstone of my life, obviously. But to me, that was something sitting in rural Oklahoma that was so far removed from what I knew and understood that it resonated with me. And as a matter of fact, it led me to write a letter to the Queen requesting a signed photograph. This was when I was 7 or 8 years old. And a few weeks later, I got a letter back on Balmoral Castle stationery from Catherine Dukedale, who's the Queen's lady in waiting, explaining that the Queen didn't send pictures, but that she had seen my letter and she thanked me for writing her. And I still have that letter today. I want you to know that obviously I did make it to the United Kingdom later in my life on several different occasions. I visited London, which is still one of my favorite cities, and I saw the Queen. But I want to be fair. My view of Queen Elizabeth was fleeting. She was passing in a car in front of me, and the window was down, and she was waving, and I still remember her bright pink hat and her bright pink coat. And I had this moment of looking at this lady that I dreamed of just seeing with my own eyes as a child. And there she was in front of me. And Debbie is yelling, take a picture, take a picture. But I couldn't even bring up my camera. I just stood and waved with a dumb smile on my face because I was so starstruck by this woman. There were so many great memories of our time in London and the UK. As I said, I love London. I love everything about it. Certainly, there are challenges that every big city has, but London to me has always been a city of where I have great memories. But from London to the Cotswolds to the White Cliffs of Dover, uh, Debbie and Daniel and I have embraced everything British. As a matter of fact, one of the endearing memories that we have is attending the second to last performance of Cats in London's West End, which is was a phenomenal experience. We missed by one night Betty Buckley coming back and reprising her role as Grisabella in Cats. But even so, the second to the last night was absolutely amazing. And I bought a T-shirt that night that I still have that has Cats on the front. It has Final Performance on the sleeve. It has glitter on it that makes the cats stand out. And every time I wore that shirt from thereafter, Daniel would just laugh and laugh because he thought that was the most ridiculous looking shirt that he ever saw. But I was so proud every time that I wore it. You see, England wasn't just a place that I visited. England was a place that I came to feel very deeply. A country where the history breathes through the stones, where culture is layered like sediment, and where geopolitics has shaped the world for centuries. So today, in this first episode on the United Kingdom, I want to take you on a little bit of a historical tour. I'm not going to delve deeply into the history of Britain, especially in its ancient times, with the with all of the people groups that traveled throughout England or that came to the island. I'm going to pick up with the Norman conquest in 1066. And the reason I do that is because that was really the foundation of the British monarchy. If you know much about British history, you know that in 1066, a man named William of Normandy, or better known as William the Conqueror, came to what is now England. His victory in the Battle of Hastings didn't just change who sat on the throne, it changed the language, the culture, the aristocracy, and the very structure of English society. William the Conqueror built castles, including the Tower of London, to secure his rule. He replaced the Anglo-Saxon elite with Norman lords. He introduced feudalism, and he created a monarchy that was more centralized, more powerful, and more deeply tied to continental Europe. The early Norman kings, William II, Henry I, Stephen, fought to maintain control, but England was a turbulent, violent, and often unstable place. Even so, the monarchy endured. But there were different phases of the monarchy, and the Normans gave way to the Plantagenets. And under the Plantagenets, what is now England really began their imperial roots, established rule of law, and created the seeds of democracy. The Plantagenet dynasty begins with Henry II, one of the most capable rulers England ever had. He reformed the legal system, creating the foundations of English common law. But his reign was also marked by tragedy, including the murder of Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral. Debbie and I have stood on the spot where Thomas Becket was murdered. And if you know the story, it is very poignant to stand there at that spot where literally British history was changed. Henry II's sons, Richard the Lionheart and King John, took England in new directions. Richard became a hero of the Crusades. John became the king who lost Normandy and angered his barons so deeply that they forced him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, a document that limited royal power and planted the seeds of constitutional government. Of course, the Magna Carta was another seminal event in changing Britain forever. The Plantagenets ruled for more than 300 years. Under Edward I, England conquered Wales and fought Scotland. Under Edward III, England entered the Hundred Years' War. Under Richard II, the monarchy faced rebellion and instability. And then came another seminal time in British history, the War of the Roses, a brutal civil war between the houses of Lancaster and York. The crown became a prize fought over by rival families. Kings were deposed, murdered, or defeated in battle. England was literally tearing itself apart. And this gave way to the rise of the next royal dynasty, the Tudors. And the period of the Tudors was marked by drama, religion, and really the birth of modern England. When the War of the Roses ended with Henry VII becoming the first Tudor king, stability was restored, the monarchy was strengthened, and the stage was set for one of the most dramatic dynasties in the history of the island. Because after Henry VII, of course, followed, you got it, Henry VIII, who was larger than life, charismatic, ruthless, and determined. But of the many things that are said and written about Henry VIII, none can compare with his break with Rome that reshaped England forever. He dissolved the monasteries, he seized church lands, he created the Church of England with himself at its head. His 6 marriages, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, became legend. And as a matter of fact, it is widely believed that his break with Rome occurred because he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon and they refused to allow it. Henry VIII's children inherited a transformed kingdom. Edward VI pushed Protestant reforms. Mary I tried to restore Catholicism, earning the nickname Bloody Mary. And then, of course, came one of the most iconic queens in British history, Elizabeth I, one of England's greatest monarchs. Elizabeth's reign was a golden age, the age of Shakespeare, exploration, naval victory over the Spanish Armada, and the flowering of English culture. She ruled with intelligence, caution, and charisma. When she died in 1603, the Tudor dynasty ended, but England had become a modern nation. And this gave rise to the House of Stuarts, which was identified by the structure of the Union, the Civil War, and the Revolution. After Elizabeth's death, the crown passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. But the Stuarts struggled with Parliament, religion, and authority. Under Charles I, tensions exploded. His belief in the divine right clashed with Parliament's demand for limits on royal power. The result was the English Civil War, royalists versus parliamentarians. Charles I was executed in 1649, and England briefly became a republic under Oliver Cromwell. The monarchy returned in 1660 with Charles II, whose reign was lively, scandalous, and marked by the Great Fire of London. His brother, James II, was deposed by the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and replaced by William III and Mary II. This revolution was peaceful but profound. It established parliamentary supremacy and limited the monarchy permanently. England had truly become a constitutional monarchy under the Stuarts. And then came the House of Hanover, which is marked by empire, industry, and constitutional stability. The 18th to 19th centuries saw the rise of the Hanoverian dynasty, beginning with George I and culminating with the iconic Queen Victoria. Under George III, Britain lost the American colonies, but expanded its global empire. Under George IV and William IV, the monarchy became increasingly ceremonial. And under Queen Victoria, Britain reached the height of her imperial power. Victoria reigned for 63 years. She became a symbol of stability, morality, and national pride. The monarchy adapted to a world of industrialization, democracy, and global influence. But everything makes a transition, and the House of Hanover moved off the scene and gave way to the modern monarchy, the Windsors, a period which has been marked by war and a changing world. In 1917, during World War I, the royal family changed its name from the Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor, distancing itself from German associations. George V guided Britain through war and constitutional reform. Edward VIII abdicated in 1936 to marry Wallis Simpson. We all remember that huge scandal that rocked the monarchy and shocked the entire nation. Then George VI led Britain through World War II with courage and dignity. It's interesting that the trajectory of the House of Windsor, was changed forever by William VIII's abdication to marry Wallis Simpson. Because George VI, his brother, would not have been the king otherwise. And therefore, that could have changed the trajectory of the monarchy, with Queen Elizabeth not becoming queen. Although there is no way to really know that because of the way things unfolded. But the fact is that Elizabeth II, daughter of George VI, was the Queen of England for 70 years, the longest serving monarch in British history. She became a symbol of continuity, duty, and quiet strength. Her presence anchored the nation through decolonization, social change, and political upheaval. I remember how I felt, I remember how I felt that day standing there on the corner by Buckingham Palace and watching her motorcade go by and seeing her, albeit very briefly, through the window of that car. It was like a lot of the things in my childhood converged on that moment. And I can always say that I saw the longest lasting British monarch in the flesh. I wish that I'd had the chance to meet her formally, maybe to share a meal, but of course, that was never going to happen. But when I saw her in that bright pink hat waving from her car, I felt the weight of her legacy. A lifetime of service distilled into a single gesture. Today, the monarchy continues under Charles III, who faces a modern world of media scrutiny, shifting of public opinion, and questions about the future of the monarchy itself. From William the Conqueror to Charles III, the British monarchy has survived conquest, civil war, revolution, religious conflict, and modern democracy. It's transformed from an absolute power to a constitutional system. It's adapted, endured, and reinvented itself across 1,000 years. The crown's no longer the engine of government, but it's the keeper of the government's memory. a living link to the past. And for me, that kid from rural Oklahoma that wanted to wave at the Queen, the monarchy remains a reminder that history is not just something we read, it's something we feel, something we witness, something that lives on in the people who carry its traditions forward. And of course, it's almost impossible to talk about modern Britain without talking about its industrial revolution. Because the industrial revolution in England and that in the United States changed the economic mechanisms of the island forever. From the late 1700s onward, England became the workshop of the world, the birthplace of modern industry, and the center of global finance. Cities exploded, railways knit the country together, and the empire expanded around the world. And we could talk at great length about the British Empire, which was vast. The empire stretched to Africa, to the Middle East, to Asia. It was a huge empire in its day. And we could talk about the merits of that empire, the pros and cons of that empire, but the reality of it was that more than most other countries, England carved out its space in the world. And it left something behind, even when the empire crumbled. It left something behind in terms of rule of law, architecture, and culture in the countries that were included in that empire. All throughout Africa, in Pakistan, in Southeast Asia, you can still see the vestiges of the British Empire. In the 20th century, Britain saw one of its most tumultuous times in history. It faced two world wars, the loss of its empire, its economic upheaval, and its cultural transformation. But the island reinvented itself through technology, finance, media, and global diplomacy. The monarchy became a symbolic yet deeply beloved institution. As my own moment with Queen Elizabeth proved, because I was surrounded by literally hundreds of people, all of whom just wanted to get a glimpse of this iconic figure in British history. When one talks about England, one has to talk about the English character. And it's been often joked about and discussed tongue in cheek. But the British character is often described as reserved, humorous, stoic, self depreciating, and quietly proud. And my experience is that those are apt descriptors. But beneath this beneath this stoicism, if you will, is a deep emotional undercurrent, a love of tradition, fairness, and storytelling. I mean, we all know that Britain has been the birthplace of some of the greatest literary minds in history, from Geoffrey Chaucer to William Shakespeare, to Jane Austen, to Thomas Dickens, to Zadie Smith. England has shaped global literature. Each era reflects a different England: medieval piety, Renaissance ambition, Victorian morality, and modern complexity. Also, Britain has given us some amazing successes in music and theater. London's West End rivals Broadway. Just to be able to see a show live in the West End was a dream come true for me and my family. And the fact that it was the second to the last performance of Cats in the West End made it even more profound. But of course, England also gave the world some of the greatest music that you can think of: the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Adele, Coldplay, and of course, Oasis, who is one of my favorite bands of the 1990s. And we could go on and on because music is part of England's national bloodstream. As far as food and drink go, British food is often mocked. I've done it myself. I will tell you, of all the countries in the world where I've had amazing cuisine, England was not one of those. But if you go there, you have to have fish and chips, you have to have shepherd's pie, you have to have Sunday roast, and more than anything else, you have to have the tea culture. The interesting thing is, I've had high tea, which is a British tradition around the world. I've had it in the Philippines, at the beautiful Peninsula Hotel in Hong Kong, but I've never had high tea actually in England, which is interesting. But that's another vestige of its colonial era that still survives to this day in countries that were formerly within the British Empire. But even so, modern England is a global culinary capital. It has an emerging number of Michelin star chefs. London has some of the greatest ethnic restaurants in the world. It truly is a cosmopolitan city. And you know, when you go to England, you realize very quickly it's not monolithic because it contains the industrial north, the pastoral Midlands, the cosmopolitan south, and of course the ancient southwest. And one of my favorite areas is the Cotswolds, where we visited cities such as Bath and wandered among honey-colored stone cottages, cobblestone streets, and really immersed ourselves in the aura of rural England. And we visited many of these landmarks. Stonehenge, where we almost froze. One of the coldest days I've ever had in my life was with the rain blowing sideways and the wind cutting into me at Stonehenge. In Dover, the White Cliffs, where we took a brutally long tour to finally set our eyes on the White Cliffs of Dover. And standing there looking at the White Cliffs, all I could think of, can you imagine the evacuation from Dunkirk when those British soldiers who were trapped by the Germans were able to see those White Cliffs of Dover and realize that they had made it home? I'm sure it brought tears to their eyes. It almost did to me more than 70 years later. And of course, Westminster, the political heart of the country. And of course, Oxford and Cambridge, the intellectual giants that are famous around the world. Of course, England's geopolitics, like most countries, is complicated. And one of the complicating factors is this legacy of empire that I talked about earlier. Its geopolitical influence came from its naval dominance, its colonial expansion, its global trade networks, and its cultural exports. Throughout its history, though, the US and the UK have had a special relationship. Of course, we know where that began with American independence in 1776. Of course, true independence didn't come until we actually won the American Revolution in 1781, but in 1776 is when the Declaration of Independence was signed. The UK and the United States share a language. We share intelligence networks. We share military cooperation. And we share cultural affinity. And even with its recent troubles, the relationship between the United States and the UK represents one of the strongest alliances in the world. As far as England's relationship with Europe, it has always been complicated and at some points even ambivalent. And of course, this led to its relationship with Europe can't be discussed without talking about Brexit. And I'm not going to talk about it a lot here because I'm going to have a special episode in this three-part series solely on Brexit. But England's or the UK's separation from the European Union by a vote of 52 to 48% reflected concerns over sovereignty, economic challenges, cultural identity, and political divisions. One thing that Brexit did, regardless of what side you're on, remain or exit, was a reformation, if you will, a recalibration of England's geopolitical posture. And as I said, we'll have an entire episode on that later on. Of course, a lot of what we still, as Americans, what we still see and are intrigued by with Great Britain is the monarchy. And as I said, Elizabeth II was one of the most recognizable figures on earth. She was stability. She was strength. She was the manifestation of a unified Commonwealth. And as I said, the day that I saw her waving and smiling is exactly how millions experienced her. A steady presence in a turbulent world. Now, in recent times, especially, Britain has faced a great number of challenges. One of those is immigration, which very likely undercut the most recent Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, forcing him to resign. That was one of the major issues, anyway, that caused his resignation. But also issues like Scottish independence, economic inequality, global competition, climate change. All of these are challenges to modern England. Even so, it remains a major player in finance, intelligence, and culture, and somewhat even in diplomacy. So where does England's future lie? Well, we'll talk more about that when we talk about Brexit in a future episode. But its future is likely defined by innovation, global partnerships, cultural leadership, and in a continued balancing act between tradition and change. The Queen's pink hat, Debbie shouting for a picture, my frozen hands at Stonehenge, Daniel's wide-eyed wonder at cats, the white cliffs glowing like chalk against the sea, the Cotswolds whispering centuries of stories. Great, great memories. And I'll be sharing more with you over these next couple of episodes. But what all that says to me is that England's not just a country, as I said before, it's a feeling. It's a place where history breathes, culture sings, and geopolitics shapes the world. And for me, it's a place where my childhood dream came true. And I'll never forget that. Join us for the next two episodes where we unpack the prime ministers of the United Kingdom from Winston Churchill through Keir Starmer, and where we unpack this very complex and very important issue of Brexit. Until then, thanks for joining me. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday on some stops along the way.